I'm going to open up the floor to you, and you can introduce yourself. Tell us about what do you do, what is your background, and what are we going to be talking about today?
Happy to give a short introduction about me and what I'm doing. So first of all, thanks June for inviting me to be here. I'm looking forward to having this discussion and to presenting my ideas around this topic. In a nutshell, about me, so I work on software development for more than 15 years now, and for the over the last 5 years, mostly focused on management. I'm currently working at Suse, an open source software company, managing a team of 12 people, and I work remotely as well as my team. So all my team works remotely from 6 different countries. And today I'm going to share my thoughts about performance management, more specifically into the time versus results facet. And I'm looking forward to discuss some ideas around this topic and also to hear some opinions from other people on how they do it.
Yeah, I think this is a really, especially, so we're not gonna be discussing about like freelancing, remote employment or whatnot. But in general, we do know that most of the companies, especially when COVID hit, and they were trying to replicate the same environment that they have in, at home and in the office. They're and so the way it was is like, oh, you log in at 5, you log in at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. and then you log out at 5 or 6. And this is how our performance have always been kind of evaluated. Were you late? Were you here on time? Like, how long did you stay in the office? Like, and even some people, when they leave the office earlier, like if you leave before the boss, it's viewed like it's a bad thing, right? And so we kind of want to discuss this a little bit that way, and then maybe also ask some of the audiences what they think about it. So I am going to give you the floor. I think you have a small presentation for us, and let's hear it.
Yeah, that's right. I have a couple of slides to introduce my ideas, and then we'll take it from there into the discussion. So on the time versus results perspective, there is a lot that can be said, and I don't think that we can just take one side. For example, picking results, because the time perspective is quite important. And I will start by sharing this common definition of time. So it's something that happens within a certain period, that where a certain condition exists, and it's bound to everything. Everything we do, from biological processes inside ourselves to things that we do at work, is bound to time. And performance itself, and what we describe here as results, is the definition of something that we accomplish, the fulfillment of a claim, a request, so meeting an expectation in a way. And I don't think we can look at those things as completely decoupled, because results often require time. You need to invest into something if you want to learn it. If you want to learn a new skill, you cannot do it without time. Now, that time can be used in different ways. You can use that time for efficient learning, or you can just spend time around something without making progress. That said, many objectives are bound to a timeline. So even if we are evaluating people based on results, we are doing that for a certain fiscal year, a certain period in time, a certain date where some objective has to be met. However, the time that we put into something, the amount of hours, is not necessarily going to be proportional to the results. So all results require time, but there is no direct relation between the invested time and the results. Obviously, you have to invest some time in order to get something. And well, about measuring time, it's usually the easiest way to perform an evaluation of what was done, because it's about measuring how much time someone invested on something. And that allows for things like understanding easily if someone has put the effort into something or not. So it's typically easier than measuring results. And it assumes that people trust each other, so that the parties trust each other. Okay, I'm evaluating for the amount of time you invested into something. I assume an efficient use of that time. I assume that you are putting the right effort into that. Then on measuring results, we also have a mixed perspective. It's typically better per se. Most people like to be evaluated based on results, but not all results are tangible. And many times intention and purpose are also relevant. Take, for example, scientific research. We are investing a huge amount of resources nowadays on the coronavirus research, and we still do not have a vaccine. So the amount of time you invest is not giving you direct results sometimes. However, it's kind of a requirement that you have the right objective. You need to focus on a certain result and sometimes put the necessary amount of time in order to get there. Now, when evaluating something based on results, especially in the context of a team, it's very common that people are affected by biases. One common one to start with is the affinity bias. It's normal that most people are more closely related to people that are alike and tend to have an easier connection with those people, and that can affect how they see or they look at someone's performance. And also, for example, the over-influence by contrasts can cause distortions of perception, cognition that also affect how the performance of someone is evaluated. And last but not least, this outcome bias, which is the tendency to judge a decision based on the eventual outcome rather than based on the quality of the decision itself at the time it was made. So many times the decision was the right decision done with the right data at a certain amount in time, but like many things, there is an uncertainty factor. And if things go wrong, the decision should be seen as a bad decision because it was actually good, but there was a probability, maybe a small probability that things could go wrong, and they did go wrong. So in order to keep track of things that could be considered into a performance evaluation, I think this concept of Bragg documents is very interesting because we rarely remember all the things we did, especially if the evaluation cycles are longer, like in many companies every year. And managers also can't remember all that data, especially if they have a lot of reports. So keeping track of the important things that were done over time, the accomplishments, is very relevant when starting a performance review and discussing concrete things. One other thing that has a very strong influence is the incentives. So you have to align those with the performance goals that you define for people, because if they do not match, then you'll have a conflict of what is being rewarded not matching what then later in the year will be considered for the performance evaluation. There are quite some important aspects to consider here. Mostly that this has a strong influence on culture, and in my personal perspective, we should always reward team players versus individual contributors that just deliver their stuff, without helping colleagues. So it's one of those things that has a big influence on performance, and that is many times hidden. As a framework, I like in particular the objective and key results framework because it works within short periods. It tries to be motivational, so it tries to define goals that are not only inspiring, but that are slightly above sometimes what is possible, sort of a moonshot. And those can help people to go over their own expectations, to be able to give something above what they initially thought it was possible. So it also works as a driver towards getting better, improving, and taking the next step. And if this is well structured, the company objectives, at least part of them, are aligned with people's objectives. So people feel that they are contributing to something bigger in the organization. So how can we put this in practice and create employees? In my perspective, managers should not do this directly. They should teach people how to self-evaluate And this is important because it's much easier for someone to do a self-evaluation about their work, having contact with everything they're delivering on a daily, hourly, minutely basis, versus a manager that sometimes can't get in touch with all the details other than once a week, for example. It is, however, important that that moment where exists this contact between a manager and a report happens to make sure that direction is being provided, so that when we get into an evaluation, there are no surprises. We know what is going on, and typically, if this is well done, people will be able to self-evaluate with a very high precision, more than a manager would be able to do unless they spend all day micromanaging people, which is also not desirable. And I would like to wrap up with this quote, which is from a paper that was published in 1956, I think. And that, among other things, includes a sentence that is very relevant, which is, what gets measured gets managed. So we need to be careful about what we manage, because about what we measure, because that will inevitably be seen as something that will have to be adjusted. It will be a metric that people will look for to increase. And if it's the wrong metric, then we might be going in the wrong direction. And well, that's about my presentation. So let's now jump into questions.
Yeah, I actually, this is a perfect line. Like, not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that we can measure matters. That is absolutely true. And recently, because I've been working on reporting, and you know how data analytics are, and because you're overwhelmed with all of these data and data that everybody is measuring, and you would think they're important, but then you really need to ask the hard questions, like, why are we measuring this? Like, what is the purpose of us, like, deep diving into these numbers, right? And I think we can apply that to our performances as well. Like, why are you measuring the time exactly? Or what should be measured? You know, when you have a job and this is supposed to be your job, what are the things that we should measure, you know, to determine that you are doing your job very well? That could be time, yes, but that could be many other things as well. And yeah. I love the idea of a brag document. I had this in one of my companies before, that you have like it wasn't a brag document, but it was during the meeting, you would do like a brag-a-log. You know, you would tell them what did you accomplish for that week. How did you and your team apply this on your company or on your end?
Well, I incentivize people to keep track of their achievements, and we periodically discuss those achievements. In my company, the formal evaluation that is bound to HR and to the rules that we have in that regard happens once a year. However, as a manager, I keep constant contact about the objectives I define for people on my team. We discuss if there are any blockers, we discuss ideas, we discuss how to be creative. So it's a lot about having a line of trust between management and engineers. In my case, since I'm on an engineering company, but I think this principle applies to almost any job. Now, on some jobs, it might be harder to do this, because not everything can be measured easily, but not also there are things that cannot be measured easily, but that can also not be tied to time. So there are some kind of jobs, especially creative jobs, where performance measurement is quite often not easy.
Right, I agree. Okay, I'm gonna start reading the question. We have one from Katerina. I don't know, Katerina, if you want to ask this live, let us know. We'd be happy to invite you on screen. But her question was, what would be the best way to measure performance on creative tasks? where it is harder to relate input. Yeah, okay. No, she doesn't want to be asked live. What would be the best way to measure performance on creative tasks or tasks where it is harder to relate input, time or output design? Very good question, especially for a designer or, what would be...
And typically hard question, but I would say that as a principle on creative work, the peer-to-peer evaluation is quite important. It's hard for a single person to make sense of creative work. And in that regard, in my personal perspective, I would favor an evaluation model where people on the team can provide feedback about each other, so that we have a group looking at a certain creative piece and giving thoughts and opinions about it. And I think this makes the process more fair, and it has an important principle here, which is, well, creativity is always subjective to who observes it. It's kind of in the eye of the beholder. So it's really unfair for a single person to judge creativity without input from others.
Okay, so your suggestion would be a peer-to-peer evaluation.
Peer-to-peer evaluation, and also a Bragg document and self-evaluation. I think here it's even more important, the self-evaluation aspect I mentioned previously, that people are able to look at their own work and say, okay, I did put the right effort into this, or maybe there is something I could have done better, and here is my expectation. Okay, it's art. The reaction might not be as I expected, but here is my thought process. Here is what I've put into this, and here is why I believe this is good work, or it is maybe something that could be improved.
Okay, sounds good. Katerina, I hope that answered your question. Feel free to ask follow-up questions if you have some. So most companies nowadays are using time tracking tools to track each task. Some of them claim to better project or estimate future tasks. What's your take on this?
I think that it can be seen separately from performance measurement. Many times companies do that not to rate engineers, employees, well, whatever the context of what the company is working on is, but to actually be able to provide feedback to customers. Many times it is important to understand how much time something will take, because there are deadlines. There is a need for coordination between people on different departments. And the common factor is quite often time. People need to synchronize around time. Therefore, there is a need for predictability. And there are ways to, for example, avoid estimations. But in the end, even when using those methods, we are looking at statistics to try to predict the future, try to predict if at a certain moment in time we'll be able to do something. This is reality in, I would say, almost any kind of work, so we can't get away from that. But there are different ways on how this can be handled.
Yeah, I agree. I think time tracking in general, and coming from somebody who has been working remotely for a while now, and in the previous, the clients that we've had before, they really did the time tracking because this was the only way that they could manage synchronicity. Like, what time are you coming in to the office, that we make sure that you have an overlap, with the team from, I don't know, from Canada, or a team from
absolutely
from California.
Time tracking is required. It should not be used to measure performance, but it is required for many other things. For people to synchronize, if you're working as a contractor and you get paid by the amount of hours that you deliver, you also need some kind of tracking, although on top of that, you can have additional incentives based on performance. Think of the sales models, most sales models. You have a base salary and you have a commission. So that commission is based on results, and the base salary is based on the amount of time that you give to the company. Many companies operate on this model, and I think it's a fair model because it considers both things. It considers effort and it also considers outcomes.
Right. Right. I agree. Okay. Next question. A lot of individuals do not know how to manage their time if you leave them to their own devices or if you let them manage it on their own. As a manager, how would you deal with this situation? So I think you mentioned about self-evaluation and that sort of thing. This is a very common thing nowadays when everybody was forced to work from home, right? They were kind of forced into managing their own, and most people find out that they don't know how to manage themselves. And number one thing that they don't know how to manage is their time. So how would you deal with this as a manager?
Management is a popular topic, but I like to think about attention management instead. It's not about just breaking down tasks and defining time windows where you work on a certain thing and avoiding context switching. All those things are important, but your attention has to be on the task at hand. And managing that attention, managing the flow of energy throughout a day, and using from the pool of tasks that you have to work on sort of prioritization mechanism that considers not only urgency and importance, but also how inspired you are per se to work on a certain task on that moment, and allocate your attention and energy based on that, can have a boost in productivity. So my advice to people is typically that alongside with considering urgency and importance of tasks, which always has to be done, that they try to manage their energy and attention levels throughout the day in order to optimize for where they are more productive or when they are more productive doing a certain task. This could be seen as, for example, people preferring to have meetings in the morning and moments of focus in the afternoon, or the other way around. So kind of arranging your schedule in a way that boosts your attention. So this would be my add-on to time management. Time management, yes, but it's not enough. Attention management plus time management can give you better results.
Do you think we need some sort of training to do this? Because I don't think in universities we do get any of these. We're not taught how to do these.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure about all the university degrees, but I also have that perception that there is not much focus on how to optimize your effort, your energy around a certain topic, which is something actually common to all the areas. It's not exclusive to technology areas. Mm-hmm. I believe this is part of a manager's role to do. This coaching, which can perfectly happen during one-on-ones, trying to find which people are able to self-organize better, which ones aren't, and helping the ones that aren't to optimize their own routines to be able to perform better. So it's one of those things that cannot be done just by reading something on the internet and trying to do it. I think it requires frequent coaching, tips, help from someone that is involved on the same project and that is able to guide people through that project.
Right. I think, like you said, as a manager, there's a big role to play in there, to teach them. If they didn't know how to do this themselves before they joined in the team, putting that into one of your onboarding training or talks, or something that this is how we work within the team, you can try to see if this would help you perform better or how can you adapt to it. As a manager, I think we have a very big role to play to encourage that.
Absolutely. And as managers, we have the right context awareness to guide people with details, with an understanding of what's at stake. That's why I believe it's important for managers to be very close to their people, to know what is going on, to do constant coaching. So, and as I mentioned, to teach them to self-evaluate so that they can ask for help when they feel there is something that could be improved. And having the level of trust that allows all this to work in a seamless way. So people shouldn't be afraid to say, hey, I did something wrong here. I think I need some help. without having some fear that this will impact their performance measurement. I think actually asking for help and fixing something wrong as quickly as possible, it's a plus on performance management.
Yeah. Can you, I want to discuss a little bit more about self-evaluate. How would you, so let's just say a new engineer, a new team member got into your group, and you're supposed to discuss this with them. How would that process be? How do you teach somebody to do self-evaluation? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry.
It's okay.
So to do proper self-evaluation, there has to be a relationship of trust. People have to know that they can tell the good and bad to their manager without fearing that will affect performance. Because performance here will be a combination of things. So people will provide their self-evaluation. After that, I as a manager will provide my feedback, say what I agree with, what I disagree with. And typically we get to a consensus where people say, okay, yeah, this is actually, no, I see myself in this picture, this makes sense for me. And we wrap that up as the evaluation that is then defined as official per se. So it's always a joint work between manager and report, and it should never be unidirectional. It should always be bidirectional, and you should always consider how people feel about the situation, how much they invested, not just the outcome, but also the potential for growth. And incentivize people to try things. So making mistakes is a necessary part of this. So you should incentivize experimentation and feedback. Feedback in the sense that people should know quickly what is the result of their actions. I don't like much when a company has an evaluation method that considers only meeting once per year and discussing pure outcomes. I think short cycles, good feedback loop, so that you know quickly what happened, and room for experimentation are fundamental to get things done.
Right. I completely agree. And let's just say it really does depend on what the type of job or, the position of the person. But what would be the general things that you would include in an evaluation? Okay, time is one thing, right? We do realize that time is one component. What are the other things that we should look into? May it be, in engineering, in design, or administration. What would be like the at least top 3 things that we should consider?
Well, time is present, is sort of an horizontal factor, but at least myself, I don't take time as per the definition of time, how much time someone invested on something as a factor. Mm-hmm. I do know that things require time and people need to have time in order to get results, but that's just a premise of something, not exactly something I will evaluate. I will not look into how much time someone spent into something for effects other than project predictability. In terms of performance measurement, I do look at outcomes. Obviously, without producing something, it's hard to give someone at least an extra point. So there has to be some quality, some dedication, some effort that is put into work. Sometimes things go wrong, that's fine. But if the right attitude is there, if people are committed, if people are actually doing what they are doing, putting some love on the task, I think that's, I would say, a required factor to have a good performance evaluation. So. Right. Being involved, helping colleagues, trying to become better. It's okay if someone doesn't know about something, as long as they know they don't know, they have a plan to learn it. That is a very positive aspect. And it allows you to look at people over time and see, I see the evolution from this person, from the moment this person joined the team, up to now, and here is what changed, and here is the reasoning I have for doing a promotion, for example.